Philippines still has terrible healthcare, yet we're the number one top exporters of nurses. It's this oxymoron, right? It's organized chaos, as some of my friends put it. Right? I got into a program called PhilPro, which was started by the former Philippine ambassador to the United States. PhilPro stands for Filipino Young Leaders Program, that takes next generation Filipino Americans, because the best and brightest leave the country for better opportunities. And his thesis was, why not take the best and brightest Filipino Americans who've worked in tech, healthcare, government, banking, law, to bring them back here to see what were the challenges here and what could they do to create these legacy projects to better the Philippines or the Filipino American community. John, what is the biggest fear you have about moving to the Philippines?
When I first moved here,
Sure.
I didn't have any fears about moving to the Philippines. I saw nothing but upside. Now, bear in mind, Philippines wasn't the first country I moved to.
Yeah.
I had left. Actually, there was one fear.
Yeah.
I was living in Curacao at the time, and my girlfriend was Dominican.
Yeah.
She was in Curacao, and I fell in love with this girl. And I had this opportunity. I was in the gaming space, in the online gambling space, and then I had this opportunity to move to the Philippines to work on the online gambling market in China. It was based in the Philippines, or not just China, but all of Asia. And so it was, to me, like a no-brainer career move.
Yeah.
I had lived in other countries prior to that. I had lived in Denmark. I've been traveling a lot. I studied abroad. I always dreamed about living in Asia. So when that opportunity came up, it was a no-brainer, and I jumped all over it. And I flew here right away. But my biggest fear was I had this relationship with this Dominican girl, and I was like, well, that might not work out. The other thing, and it didn't work out. As soon as I moved here, I might have saw her once, and then things just kind of fizzled out. And then the other problem I had was, I had a daughter in the States, and we were seeing each other every other weekend. So, I had already moved out of the States when she was 8 years old. And I said, you know what? I have to explore my career outside the US. I just felt like I wasn't getting ahead.
Yeah. Yeah.
I felt like I was very capable. I was very talented in what I was doing. I was crushing it. I was crushing the numbers. I was in sales, but I wanted to do more. I wanted to do product development. I wanted to build websites. I wanted to build tech startups. And my boss just always pigeonholed me in sales because I was good at it.
Yeah.
And so I just felt like there was better opportunities for me as an Asian.
Yeah.
And honestly, I just kind of felt, I felt like I had to fight so much harder to gain my respect in the US.
Yeah.
To prove myself. So I just felt, I always wondered growing up, what would it be like if I grew up in a place where everyone looked like me?
Mm-hmm.
So I thought I might just be on more equal ground. And so anyways, to make a long story short, I moved out here for work, and turns out, I actually felt like I stood out a lot more.
I was going to say, actually, it would have been the exact opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you? What you haven't moved out here, but what would
actually, so my story is a little different, because even though I identify as Filipino American, I grew up here for the first 12 years. I grew up in Cebu, actually, for the first 12 years of my life. But my upbringing was different from most Filipinos because I was spending my summers in the United States. My grandparents immigrated to the United States in the 70s. My parents, even though they were both born and raised in Cebu City, both were educated abroad and lived abroad for a while. My mom got her master's degree in theater in Dallas, even though my mom's 100% Indian, but born and raised in the Philippines. And that's another rabbit hole and story about the Indians who live, the Sindhis, the Indians who live in the Philippines.
In the Philippines,
there's a large group of them, actually, a large group of them that have been here since the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. Because they during the war between India and Pakistan, the partition, actually, a lot of the Indians living in the Pakistan side were called Sindhis. They're like the Jewish Indians. They were driven out of their homes because then they were told this is now part of Pakistan side, but they were considered Indian. They weren't Muslim, so they're driven out of their homes. And so instead of starting all over again in India, they said, "Fuck this. Let's move to other parts of the world." So a lot of them moved to port cities. So they moved to, Spain, London, Indonesia, Hong Kong, and a good amount of them moved to the Philippines. So my grandfather's side on my grandfather on my mom's side on the Indian side moved to Cebu, and because a lot of these Sindhis came from the same hometown, they all started trading with one another, and they already knew one another because they trusted one another. So they said, "Hey, what's hot? What's trending?" And this was back in the 1930s, 40s, 50s. What's trending in Spain, in Hong Kong, in London, in Gibraltar, even in Jamaica, and they started trading with one another. And so collectively, they built wealth. They built collective wealth because they were doing business with one another, and that's how they went from being this small immigrant community of building large enough collective generational wealth. So a lot of people know India and Pakistan, but before it was just one India, right? And if you've ever seen the movie Gandhi, there was a guy named Jinnah Gandhi was for keeping India together. And Jinnah was part of that opposition who said, no, Indians and Pakistanis should live separately. We should have a division. And so my mom always says that even before the partition, Indians and Pakistanis were living in peace with one another. But it was because of that division of dividing India and Pakistan that started a lot of the turmoil.
Yeah. Even, we had David Lee Chu yesterday, and he's Chinese Filipino.
Yeah.
And there's a big Chinese Filipino population.
Huge here. Yeah.
A lot of them came after the Cultural Revolution from China. We ended up in Vietnam. They ended up here in the Philippines. A lot of them ended up in Taiwan and Malaysia. And then you have, obviously, the Spaniards have been here. Then you have, there's been such a big melting pot of a bunch of ethnicity in the Philippines. But you know what the most interesting thing about it is? Everybody who grew up here, regardless of what their face looks like, identifies as Filipino.
Of course.
Right?
Even though they're ethnically, a lot of them, especially the old school Chinese, they always say, even though you're Chinese in the Philippines, you have to marry Chinese. They call that the Great Wall. I don't know if you heard of that term. Just like even my family, the Sindhis, these Indians, they normally just intermarry Indian. So it was rare for me and my parents because they married outside of their culture. My father's Filipino Chinese, my mom's Indian.
But yet you still identify as Filipino, even though you're 1/4 Filipino.
I'm actually a fourth Filipino. Yeah, 50% Indian, 25% Chinese, 25% Filipino. But out of all of those, I still identify as Filipino more. Filipino is the strongest in terms of my identity, but I still love identifying. I still embrace all the Chinese in me and the Indian in me. I still go to Indian weddings all the time. I love Bollywood.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What's funny about Filipinos in the States and a lot of Philams?
What?
And I don't know if you noticed this too, because when I was growing up there, like every Filipino, there's so many Filipinos in America that did not identify as Filipino. A lot of them would be like, the Hawaiian Filipinos would say they're Hawaiian.
No, they say they're Ilocano, actually. The Hawaiian Filipinos don't even say they're Filipino. They say
you
they're
guys
Ilocano.
don't even say Filipino, right?
And I'm like, what? Ilocano? But that's also, it goes back to migration. A lot of the early farm workers were from the Ilocos area, the Ilocos region, right? We're Ilocano. And so even till this day, you go to Hawaii and you'll see that even though a third of the population of Hawaii is Filipino, a lot of them still will will mix Pidgin and Ilocano and Tagalog and English words. T probably knows this better than I do.
Yeah.
Right, brother?
But all the Pidgin and Hawaiian. Hawaiian Filipino who speak perfect pidgin. But like in California, I remember there was just a bunch of Filipinos who would say they're Spanish, Italian, whatever. Like whatever sort of mix they were, it was just some sort of like I don't know. I met a lot of people who would say they're a lot of times they would identify with whatever they were mixed with.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You can meet a Filipino here anywhere who looks totally white and they'll say, I'm Filipino.
Yeah. I mean, you'll see a lot of fair-skinned Filipinos.
Yeah.
I mean, my godfather is like an albino Filipino, and he was the former ambassador to the former Philippine ambassador to the United States. But people would not believe he was Filipino because he looks very, very white.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then you were there since 12 years old and
So I was in Cebu till I was 12. Ended up going to, and so growing up, I was pretty privileged, and I didn't realize I was privileged. I mean, that's the thing I realized about kids growing up here, but who are in this bubble.
Yeah.
My parents my mom had an international school, so most of my kids growing up were actually, sons and daughters of business owners, diplomats, and so that was my world originally. I grew up in this performing arts school called Arts Magnet. They used the arts to teach academics. So it was and this was the first of its kind. It was very early on. My mom was an educator, but had a master's in theater and really wanted to change the way learning was done here in the Philippines. So instead of living in the United States, she decided to move back to Cebu and start this school. And so through that, typical of my peers, you grew up with a yaya, a driver, right? A yaya is a maid, right? So a driver, you're country club kid, you're surrounded by just that, and that's really what you know. I didn't really associate with lower class, or it wasn't intentional. It was just how my environment. And then when I was 12, I ended up getting a scholarship to a public high school here in the Philippines called Philippine High School for the Arts. It was it was actually created by Imelda Marcos. She was a big proponent and advocate for the arts, and saw a school like Juilliard in Interlochen in Michigan, where they were very heavily focused into the arts. And because she loved that, she created a school focused on that. Everybody in the Philippines is familiar with Philippine Science High School. It's where a lot of these smart kids in the STEM go to. So it's also a public high school, but it's a full scholarship. So I ended up, for some reason, I don't know why, maybe because I was this theater geek who loved performing, ended up getting accepted into this boarding school all the way in Los Baños, Laguna. I don't know if you're familiar with Los Baños. It's the mountain area. So it's in Mount Makiling, and this school is a complete 180 from what I'm used to. Right, I didn't speak Tagalog at the time. I mostly spoke English and Bisaya, and then I get plucked into this boarding school where I can't relate to any of my classmates.
When did you leave?
I left when I was 16. So I left Cebu when I was 12.
Okay, gotcha.
And I moved to boarding school here in Luzon, right? 2 hours away from Manila.
Okay.
And it was a big culture shock because I didn't speak the language. I didn't really understand the Filipino culture. I was seen as disrespectful. I was seen as mayabang and proud. I would speak up and argue with my teachers, things that I knew that was normal, that was taught to me, but they saw me as this arrogant American kid, even though I wasn't American at that time.
Did you go to international school?
No, not really. But
by then your English was perfect still.
Well, English was always my first language.
Okay.
Right? My parents spoke it at home.
Okay.
Both my parents, even though they were born and raised in the Philippines, also went abroad to get educated, right?
Gotcha.
and moved back to the Philippines. They had the opportunity to just live in the United States, but they said they'd rather raise kids here. And my dad was an entrepreneur in import export. His business was doing well. My mom wanted to create this school, so the school I grew up in was somewhat like an international school because my mom started this school and created the curriculum. It felt like an international school, and a lot of our kids were also, kids of not just Filipino kids.
When did you move to the States?
I immigrated to the States when I was 16, around 2006.
Where did you go first?
Oh, I immigrated to Chicago.
Chicago,
So, yeah,
right?
that's
Yeah.
where my grandparents were from. So, from hot middle of weather to just cold Chicago, and I've never lived anywhere ever since. I've been there.
You
And
think coming from a privileged background in the Philippines helped you out in the States?
it helped me assimilate. It definitely helped me assimilate.
Tell me how.
Actually, so what really helped me assimilate was not just the privileged background, but because I'd been coming back and forth as a kid to the United States and the Philippines, I knew what the United States
Right.
was like. I would spend my summers in Chicago with my grandparents.
You didn't get picked on?
No, but to make friends, I ended up doing my classmates' homework a lot of the times, just to or I ended up my being picked on was more of my being picked on was more of I remember like my first year in college. I went to community college, but they were just like most of my classmates in that community college initially were white. And they were just like, "You're from the Philippines, don't you guys live in huts over there? Isn't it like tribal?" And I was just I was just like, "Oh man, you do not know the world, do you? You've never been outside of the United States."
It's funny how ignorant Americans are. Like, it's funny how like so few people have actually traveled outside of the U.S. and if they do, it's usually Canada or Mexico.
Yeah, it's usually Canada or Cancun for spring break, right? They call that international travel.
Yeah, my closest friend growing up, or my oldest friend growing up, was Rudy. And it was so funny when you said that because Rudy was a little bit of a fob when I first met him. And I swear I couldn't have gotten through high school without copying off of him.
Yeah.
Or he was doing my homework or helping me get past the test.
Yeah. That's also what made me realize too, the educational system in the United States was definitely far behind. The entry level, like stuff that I was doing in college for, let's say, math, was stuff I was doing in grade school in the Philippines.
So it was harder here in the Philippines.
It was definitely harder here in the Philippines.
I always wonder why all the Filipino kids at school all was in the honors students. They had good grades. They got into good colleges. That it was easy for them. Like that's why I was copying off these Filipino
Americans,
kids.
or like these were Filipino immigrant kids.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. Well, or they either that or they grew up there. But and I'll be honest with you, I have a confession. For the longest time, when I moved to the Philippines, and I swear I'm not the only foreigner who thought this, I thought Filipinos were dumb. And there's this stereotype, especially because you just deal with so much frustrating things here.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It took me a long time to figure this out.
Yeah.
So one aspect of it, like when you go to the store, for example,
Yeah. Because please. Sure.
Just basic customer service. You go to the store and the guys are selling mobile phones or they're selling they're selling, it's an electronic shop. You go in there and you ask them, where the plugs are for the phone. And they say, "Oh, sorry, sir, no more out of stock." I'm like, "Well, what's that right there?"
Yeah.
It's like you just can't take anything at face value.
Yeah.
And there are so many times when you're like trying to reason with them.
Yeah.
And you can't get through.
No,
because
and you're
it's
like,
just
why
a
don't you
hard
get
line-
it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a hardline rule. It's like always a no. It's always like, "Sorry, sir." And it's just like, I was like, it's so frustrating for so many foreigners who just move here.
Yeah.
And I swear if you're a foreigner moving to the Philippines, it might take you 2, 3, 5 years to get assimilated to this. And you might never, and you might end up leaving, pulling out your hair, frustrated. And I was that way.
Yeah. And it's common here. I mean, you see both sides, right? You're like, I'll give you an example. Why is the Philippines like the number one destination for customer service call center operators? Right.
And how many Americans are so freaking frustrated at their customer service calls that go to the Philippines? It's like, fuck, we got a Filipino here. I'm not going to get anything done. Or I have this specific problem that needs to be problem solved, and it's just like so frustrating.
Yeah.
It's gotten a lot better though.
It has definitely gotten a lot better. I mean, with American companies, I'd seen like with JP Morgan Chase, it's definitely like, I'm not plugging these companies, but there's a lot of big, companies here than American companies that I see are better than compared to calling, let's say, a BPI or a BBDO or these Philippine banks versus American banks. The customer service with these Philippine banks are terrible, and they make you wait a lot longer too.
Right.
But what I've realized is it's also comes down to like the level of leadership and training. The problem with most Philippine companies here is that they don't teach and empower their employees to think. Even if you go to a restaurant, for example, and
Oh yeah, you're constantly asking for the same spoon and fork and the menu.
Yeah.
It's like,
or if
you haven't figured this out by now.
or if they get the order wrong. I mean, I remember like my first few times coming back to the Philippines, and they get my order wrong, but they still expect me to pay for it. I'm like, no, I'm not paying for it.
Yeah.
But then they're like, well, I have to charge you, otherwise, I have to be the one paying for it, and and that's a problem too. These restaurant owners, for example, they teach them through fear, and they're like, oh, if you make a mistake, you have to pay for that item.
I have a funny story about this. I was once we were in a Japanese restaurant, me and my Swedish friends. It was outside, and we ordered. It was lunchtime. We ordered a beer,
Yeah,
right?
and it's
You
warm.
expect it to be cold. They bring it, and it's warm.
With ice.
No. We said, oh, we want a cold beer. They said, you want ice? We're like, no, we want a cold beer. They're like, okay, sir. They take the beer away. 20 minutes later, 30 minutes later, we're like, where's our beer? And she goes to the fridge, opens the fridge. She said, the beer is getting cold. And it was just like the funniest. It was just like type of customer service you deal with here in the Philippines. But you know what? I learned to realize that, it took me a long time to realize that a lot of these people, and these are like kind of like the lower level staff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Entry level staff, things like that. The guys who are, cooking your food, serving your food, service work, etc. A lot of these guys aren't necessarily. They're not. I don't think they're dumb.
No,
honestly,
they're not.
Honestly, I don't think they're dumb. I think a lot of it is just because they're more incentivized to just kind of make you go away. Like they don't care. They honestly don't care if the business works or they're not worried about whether the business makes money or they're driving more revenues. They're just kind of like, I don't get paid very much anyway, so I just want to pass the time up, and you're a hassle, so just I'll tell you sorry, sir, so that you can go away.
It's more like I think it falls on a lot of business owners. They don't invest in training their employees. They don't invest in their employees because for them, I can just, if this person doesn't work out, I can just hire another person. That's why you still see things like you don't see most businesses don't invest in technology. Everything is still manual, right? Pen and paper. I mean,
Yeah,
especially if you go to an outside of Manila, right? BGC, it's it's definitely different, right? I call BGC fake Manila because it's also this bubble.
Yeah.
You see the people living in BGC are not really your typical, everyday Filipinos, right? It's people who work for multinational corporations, people with businesses, it's people traveling or diplomats.
Yeah.
Right? It's not your everyday person in Manila.
I don't think it's just training though.
No, it's not just training. Training is one of the aspects, right?
There's some common sense aspects to it, right?
Yeah.
Like you're in a restaurant and you see the lady. I mean, like, look, at some point, sometimes even with training, they don't exactly teach you how to be efficient. Right?
Yeah.
So you'll go to a restaurant here and you'll see 10 people standing.
Yeah.
Right. But yet you got to ask for your fork, your water, your menu, and you got to follow up on your food because sometimes, the food doesn't come.
Yeah.
And it's sitting there getting cold, and you're like, "Oh, follow up on my food," and they bring it in right away.
Yeah.
Or they're just or they don't. There's so many issues around it, but honestly, I just don't. I don't. A lot of it. Yeah. Or you'll see if it's a busy restaurant, the waiter is going to run all around.
Yeah.
And then as soon as anybody raises their hand,
Yeah.
boom,
Yeah.
boom, boom. Of course they're gonna forget.
Yeah.
Of course they're gonna forget. It's like ADD. Like they're just running around from restaurant. But in the States, you see one waiter working the whole
Full
room.
room. Yeah.
And the way she does it, or he does it, she goes from table to table
Yeah.
efficiently and says, "Sir, how are you doing?
Yeah.
Can I get you anything else?"
Yeah.
And then they move to the next table.
Yeah.
And the next table. And the next table.
Yeah.
And you're like, if you raise your hand, "Oh, sorry, I'll get back to you."
Yeah.
And they do their round because it's much more efficient because they go back to the kitchen, grab everything all at once, and bring it all back. And done.
Yeah.
And one person can handle 5 or a whole room.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think there's some other aspects to it too, right?
It's not just training. It's also a lot of like I worked restaurant. I used to have a restaurant in Chicago as well, and I would do the same thing where I would check on table. Here in Filipino culture, it's not normal for a server to check up on you. They usually are like normally people have to raise their hand and then they come over to you, right? That's a cultural thing. Right. And I think slowly as more and more people are coming to the Philippines, there's new restaurants, they're slowly improving the way they're doing things. But it's still got a long way to go. Right. I think ultimately it just boils down to the culture of how things are here.
And it took me a while to kind of once I realized that they're just not incentivized, right?
Yeah.
They're not incentivized to do a better job. And like once I realized they were just incentivized for you to kind of just go away, it made me accept things a lot better here.
Yeah.
But before that, like, I was running a tech company here back in 2010, 2012, one of the early tech companies. One of my biggest frustration, and I'm not the only one, is what we call brain drain here.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Think about it here. And I used to blame it on that. I used to blame it on brain drain because I used to think, okay, all the most smart and capable Filipinos have left the Philippines for a better life.
Yeah.
Whether it was from the Marcos era or just
it's still going on constantly.
Right.
Yeah.
The Philippines is the number one exporter of migrant workers. Look at all the Filipinos in Dubai,
Hong
Singapore,
Kong,
Kong,
yeah.
in the US. And oftentimes in a tech company or whatever company, you would train and develop somebody and they would take a better job offer, a higher paying job offer overseas because you just couldn't pay them as much because you don't make as much money here.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. That's been happening since the Marcos era.
Right.
Right. That's why my grandparents left. And the ones stuck here are the ones who either can't leave or don't have the ability to leave. With brain drain, the best and brightest leave the country for better opportunities. So it's really hard to keep talent here. That's always a struggle for most businesses. But then it goes back to the leadership of the country. Most of the people in leadership and in power thrive on the inefficiency of this country, thrive on people not being as educated. That's how they get most of the votes.
You know what?
Let's be honest.
This is a huge frustration of mine. It's not gonna come out of my mouth. I'm gonna ask you to explain this, please, to people who don't know what you mean. A lot of people don't know what you mean. What? Why the hell would leaders want our country to be dumb?
Right?
Kind of sounds familiar with what's happening in the U.S. right now. Right?
Well, in the U.S., you saw that it was on the East Coast, West Coast, it was blue, and then in the center it was red.
Right.
But for the Philippines, that's and people are going to hate me for this, or some people you might get some negative comments, but I've being able to go back and forth, I see that the Philippines is a country that really thrives on profits on its people, right?
Yeah.
The biggest export is its people. It's not a product, right? 20% of the GDP comes from money going back into the Philippines, these overseas remittances. So, with people in power, with things being more efficient, with people being less educated, they get to control everything. That's why you have monopolies and duopolies of telecom companies or banks and different type of companies, right? It's because they even said there was a study that came out that there's 70 families that rule 90% own 90% of the Philippines.
Right.
Right.
And so it favors them to
Of
make sure
course.
that people are less educated.
Of course. I mean, where in any other country, where will you see people running for office by getting votes by just dancing?
Yeah.
Right? Dancing and singing. I'm like, this is not a talent competition, right?
Yeah.
But-
tell us, have you seen one of these? I've never seen one of these like voting parades. What does it look like?
Oh man, it's like a whole show and spectacle. I mean, it's well, most people get votes here too. They say vote buying is illegal, but it's still being done. I mean,
Yeah, of course.
I know people who've personally gotten money from, or let's say weeks worth of food from these elected officials where they, if you vote for them, you know
Right.
you get that you get this. And so the problem is most Filipinos, are living in poverty, or they're living day to day. They're living paycheck to paycheck. So of course, if they get a week's worth of food, they'll vote for that person because they're just trying to get by.
Right.
And
Of course, right? And then, you're playing music, everyone's singing, everyone's feeling good.
Yeah.
Who cares what this guy's policy is?
yeah,
as
they
long
don't,
as
they
he's
don't
giving
ask
some
about
money.
policy. They
Yeah.
never like you look at the questions, right? Or you look at what they say, right? They just say, "Oh, we'll give you this."
Right.
They don't even talk about economics. They don't talk about how many jobs they're going to create. They don't or if they do, they just say, "Oh, we're going to make your lives better. We're going to do this." But Philippines still has terrible healthcare, right? Yet we're the number one. We're one of the top exporters of nurses, right? Why? It's this oxymoron, right? It's organized chaos, as some of my friends put it, right? It's fascinating, right? But what keeps me coming back to the Philippines, because I've been coming back every year since 2013. And then 2015 is when I got into a program called PhilPro, which was started by the former Philippine ambassador to the United States. PhilPro stands for Filipino Young Leaders Program, that takes next generation Filipino Americans, because the best and brightest leave the country for better opportunities. And his thesis was, why not take the best and brightest Filipino Americans who've worked in tech, healthcare, government, banking, law, to bring them back here to see what were the challenges here and what could they do to create these legacy projects to better the Philippines or the Filipino American community.
It makes sense. Did you see? I saw somewhere where, and I researched this too. Did you know that out of the Asian American communities, out of all the Asian American communities, Filipinos are one of the highest paid Asians in America. I think top 3.
According to the U.S. Census Bureau, yes, Filipino American. So it's usually like Chinese, Taiwanese, and then
I think it's Indian, Taiwan, and then
Filipino.
Filipinos.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and that's largely due because of the healthcare.
Mostly healthcare. Majority. I mean, it's you see folks like Joe Coy who talk about it, right? There's, in fact, funny enough, I went to school for nursing. I got a nursing degree, so I'm still a nurse till this day, but I don't practice anymore. But it was, it was also the way to get a job that was secure, that was high paying. Right.
You were a nurse too, huh?
Yeah. I was a nurse where the
it's so
elevator
funny.
door opened. Sorry, sir. You're on the wrong floor. This is 5. You should be on 4. That's one more floor down further.
It's so funny because I always my oldest friend Rudy. He's a
a nurse too?
He's a nurse too, and I for the longest time, okay, in the U.S.
Yeah.
Growing up, I wasn't, I was a little bit ignorant too, and I was just like, isn't that a woman's job?
Yeah.
At the time, it was mostly all women that were nurses, and I'm like, well, why don't you be a doctor or something?
Yeah.
Why are you being a nurse?
No, it was less school and not as expensive. Really, nursing school was very affordable compared to being going to med school.
But wait, would a lot of men in other ethnicity be okay with being a nurse? Or is it just that Filipinos, there's just way more Filipino men that are okay with it?
No, when I went to nursing school, well, actually, there's still not much men in nursing school. I was the only guy who graduated in my nursing class.
I bet you out of the men, all the population of nurses, that are men, I
Mhm.
bet you it's disproportionately mostly Filipino
It
guys.
it could be. It's
Yeah.
it
Can anyone look this up?
we yeah, there's definitely way more female nurses going to nursing school. But that was also one of the reasons. I mean, I wanted to be a theater actor. I wanted to.
Right.
I did theater all throughout preschool, grade school, go to performing arts school. I get dumped into Chicago. I work for a Filipino American theater company, and that's how actually I ended up starting my business. But while I was doing that, my parents were just like, "Hey,
Right.
you need something that's stable. You're not going to make money in theater.
Right.
Let's be
Yeah.
real. It's very hard to
Right. Well,
have a
look,
career in
I know
theater."
it sounds emasculating
Yeah.
to be a nurse as a man, but honestly, I'm not trying to knock them. I'm
No.
actually trying to point out a very unique trait and quality about Filipinos.
Well, Filipinos are
different.
very like they go above and beyond when it comes to caring for people.
They're the best immigrants anybody can ask for. If you think about it.
How so?
I mean, what when you're in the US and you think about immigration,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who are the best immigrants? Filipinos. Come on, they're like, they come in, they're smart, they work hard, they're very family,
Family oriented.
they
Yeah.
are in very service natured jobs such as nursing. What do you call those old people home?
Nursing homes,
nursing homes,
retirement homes. Yeah.
retirement homes, and they do the jobs that a lot of people won't do.
Mhm.
And they do it with care, and it's like, even yayas, like if you
Yeah.
want a yaya, you want a Filipino because you trust them.
Yeah, I
Trust
mean,
them with your kids.
most most celebrities even say that their favorite nannies or favorite yayas were Filipino, right? But why can't Filipinos be more than just that? They can be. Why
They
can't
are.
they,
They
why
are,
can't
though.
they be more CEO Filipinos? Entrepreneurial Filipinos are already entrepreneurial in nature. But what I hate seeing personally is that they keep saying, "Oh, Filipinos, yeah." Like when I went to school and I went to college and with my white classmates, they're like, "Oh, you're Filipino. My nanny was Filipino."
Yeah.
Right? But I'm just like, Filipinos can be more than just that. Yes, we're caring people. But Filipinos sometimes are just not given these better opportunities, right? And for me, it's frustrating. It's frustrating to see that sometimes they pigeonhole Filipinos in that box that, oh, you're the best caretakers, you're the best caregivers. But I'm like, yeah, but we can be so much more than that, right? A great example who like rises above that is this Filipino American billionaire who Sheila Marcelo. I mean, she started Care.com and IPO'd that company and sold it. I mean,
Nice. Yeah.
right? There's Filipinos who are doing amazing things, but we're always lumped into just being in that servant category, in that service category.
Okay. Let's break this down a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's understand why that is. Why is it there is a lack of Filipino leaders?
Mhm.
Right? One of the cultural traits, it's a double-edged sword. One of the great cultural traits is, what's that term where you don't rock the boat?
Yeah. Where you're just like, you keep your head down, you
What's the
work
Filipino
hard.
term? I forgot.
Um,
Anybody know?
the Filipino term for
Yeah.
rocking the boat. I mean, there
Like you don't rock the boat.
Like-
You kind of
yeah.
you,
Well,
you keep everyone kind of happy.
this isn't necessarily the word for it, but there is that term utang na loob where
Yeah.
you are indebted,
Right.
right? So you're indebted to that person, right? So sometimes if like somebody gives you a job, right? If you see them making a mistake, or even let's say you're the president of a company, or and you get them a job, but you see that when you're doing that job, you see that person doing something illegal or immoral. You don't speak up against that person because you're indebted to them, right? But it's also just like Filipino with their family members, right? It's a lot of Filipinos will say, "Oh, Filipino parents or grandparents are just like, oh, I paid for your school, and so now that I'm older, you have the people who are taking care of their parents or the grandparents, they have that utang na loob. They feel like they're indebted
Right.
to that person.
I have a personal anecdote experience about this that I want to tell you about. I want to ask you what you think. So when I was running ZipMatch, it was obviously a tech startup. We raised venture funding for it. We got up to about 70 employees.
It's big,
right?
It's huge, yeah.
And then so you understand in a tech environment, it's a lot of trial and error. It takes a lot of talent, creativity.
Yeah.
And you need to cut low performing people.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So we hired, obviously I can't manage everybody at 70.
Yeah. No, you need talent, team leaders and such. Yeah.
Right. So I hired team leaders. And a lot of them were Filipino managers, where I promoted them to become management too as they grew out their team.
Yeah.
Not once did any one of those leaders fire anybody.
Yeah.
I was the one who had
To be the one.
the
Yeah.
firing. And the thing is, you have a 6-month probation here in the Philippines. And this
Yeah.
is your period where you kind of prove yourself. You have your KPIs. You got to, hit your KPIs. You got to perform.
Yeah.
And this is when you make your cuts.
Yeah.
Because after 6 months, it's a lot harder to terminate
Yes.
somebody here.
Yeah.
Right. And so it just not once did any of the management team fire anybody, let go of anybody.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't even tell if they were, we try to force performance evaluations and everything.
Yeah.
And it was always positive.
Yeah. It's like
How could that-
perfect. Five,
How could that be in a tech environment, right? When you're
But you understand, you're starting a tech company back in the early 2010, 2011 when tech companies weren't a thing here in the Philippines, right? And Filipino work culture is very different from American work culture. Like you mentioned, American work culture, it's KPIs. Here in the Philippines, it's called pakikisama. How do you get along with that person well, right? Is this person and does this person do I like sometimes and that's what I hated about sometimes working in this environment is you have underperformers, but then they end up doing very well within their group, their social circle.
right.
And so it's really a balancing act, right? What I've learned works for me is from the very beginning, we're very culture focused, and we say, hey, look, we're not like most companies where it's not just about like doing your job, but it's about building this company culture of training people to be leaders. And if you can train people to not only do your job, but that person gets to train that person to do that job too, that's how we know they're effective team leaders.
So you think it's changed?
It's changing, especially with the amount of multinational and companies coming in. There's a lot of there's talent here, but again, we're still far from it.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in really changing the culture here.
I find that they were, and maybe this was my experience back then, and maybe it's changed a lot, but it was like they were very more vested in each other's relationship. It was very much tribal rather than the overall health of the company.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
we try to give them stock options. We try to give them all
that's-
sorts of incentives. It just didn't matter. It mattered more how they felt with each other.
Yeah.
Whether they were comfortable with each other, whether they felt good, and no one rocked the boat, and everybody got along.
Yeah.
And it was the funnest company ever because when we had like team outings or group events, it was the funnest thing. They were like, we called each other family,
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but there's a downside to that when you're trying to build something
is.
disruptive and innovative and you're trying to go for high growth,
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know the answer.
Man, we're this is going to be a whole nother podcast in itself that we can like go down a rabbit hole with, or I can talk about you with my personal experiences with my team. But
Sure, let's move on. We'll
table that.
We'll dive into that in another podcast. I
Yeah.
think this is a great talk, and a lot of people running BPOs here. I'm sure they can relate to exactly what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah.
I met you and I was very interested in what you're doing. You're doing something pretty unique. You're bringing back, we talked about the problem with brain drain.
Yeah.
And you're bringing back these talented people back here to the Philippines.
Yeah.
What the hell inspired you to do this?
I think it really came back to me wanting to come back here and live here, and every time, like you mentioned, you come back here and you're frustrated with the way the things are, and most people will just have that bahala na mentality, right? Or most people will be like, well, that's the Philippines for you. But I always keep saying it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this difficult. It doesn't have to be this inefficient. Like
What is bahala na?
Bahala-
I know what it is, but
Yeah.
tell people what.
I
it
mean,
is.
bahala na is like kesa rasara. I mean, leaving it up to God, right? You're just gonna pray and hope that things work out for the best, right? And so that's why you see some things, you see projects here, like where it comes to construction projects or that just don't work out well, or even we're very Filipinos, they're very like religious people, but we are very religious people, but we sometimes leave it off to just chance. Like an example is like the basic example, you have a family member who's just like, they have diabetes, but they're just gonna keep like taking sweets, and they're like, bahala na. They're just they sometimes just leave it in the hands of God in a way.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've had a bahala na experience. I
all
mean,
the time. But
right,
I start to become like that a little bit more when I'm here.
Yeah,
It's just like,
yeah,
just the way it is.
Yeah, bahala na.
I
Right?
could beat my head against the wall for the next 10 years, or just accept the way they are.
Yeah, and that's I see that sometimes as a problem in Filipino culture, right? And sometimes because of that there's no sense of urgency, or sometimes they don't take things into like importance, that if this happens, we don't realize like the cataclysm of events that could happen like that.
Right. But then, sometimes I go back to the US, and I'm becoming more and more of a foreigner every time I go back home in the US. And I'm always constantly being yelled at for something. I'm becoming Filipino because I'm just like, oh, no. But then they're complaining about the way I'm driving, or the way I stand in line, or whatever. There's always something you're doing wrong in the US.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about, T? Okay, you're living in Hawaii, so you don't count.
Oh, well, Hawaii's different. Hawaii's got a bahala na, but things work better in Hawaii. I'm a lot happier in Hawaii.
But in California, in Southern California, or my God, liberal states. Yeah.
So, man, sorry, where was I going this? So there's a sense of like complacency. I guess that's like the best way to describe it. But my goal is not, I tell people I don't have the answers. My goal is not, I don't say that there's a problem with the Philippines, but I see that things can be improved here, because there are ways to do better things. And I'm a big believer in, like, you got to sometimes get out of that bahala na mentality and think about, okay, how can we make this better? How can we make this more efficient? And so, I mean, when I got to be part of PhilPro, that program in 2015, a year after that, in 2016, I became the immersion program director and became a 501c3 nonprofit organization, or NGO.
And you started this yourself?
I didn't. It was started actually by the former ambassador to the Philippines, the former Philippine ambassador to the U.S., Jose Aquisha Jr. He was the ambassador under the Aquino administration. And he just saw that there was a lot of talented Filipino Americans, but they never, every time he would talk to them and ask them, why don't you go back to the Philippines? You're always in the US, or you'll take vacations in Europe or South America, but never visit the motherland. The most common answer was, well, we don't really see Philippines as home.
Yeah.
It's our parents are connected to it, but we're not connected to it. And so what he did was this was back in 2012. They started doing these searches for high-performing Filipino Americans in different industries. And if you applied to the program, and if you got in, you got an all-expense paid trip to the Philippines for 1 week to meet the heads of government, the heads of business, the heads
Oh,
of NGOs,
wow.
right? So it's not just a vacation. It wasn't really a vacation. It was really a
Yeah.
lot of work. You're just in meetings day after
Yeah.
day. You're understanding the political landscape. You're understanding the economic landscape. But from there, it helps you form your understanding. It gives you a crash course on the Philippines.
That's
But
amazing.
it's an amazing program. I'm very blessed to be part of that program because they only choose anywhere from 10 to 15 every year.
I feel like you gotta pay for their trip in order to get them to come
Yeah.
out here
So
because I
yeah.
can't convince
Yeah.
any of my Filipino friends to
So
come back to the Philippines for some reason.
so that's how we did it, right? We're like, hey, apply for this program, and through that program, a lot of leaders have, created their own legacy projects out of that program. So one of them, Earl Valencia, he's like known as like the startup founder of the Philippines. He started a company called Idea Space. He's alumni of that program. Um, there's New York Times best-selling author Nicole Ponseca, who had a restaurant in New York called Jeepney in Maharlika. Right so it's all different industries. There's an architect who started a bamboo company in Dumaguete called Kawine Collective. So they're all doing amazing things. I mean, even when it comes to um, law and justice, there's a judge from Maryland who started a program to combat trafficking and exploitation of young Filipino children. So they all create their own little solutions or own little tiny
Mhm.
projects that make an impact in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
My focus was on entrepreneurship. I wanted to try to find more entrepreneurs to come back to the Philippines and create startups.
So the problem I see with a lot of Filipino, especially Filipino Americans, maybe not so like if you're from Dubai or whatever. I think if you're from like those countries, you want to come back because in Dubai you're treated like a slave almost, right? Here,
They're second class
right,
citizens there in
right,
Dubai.
yeah. So
Yeah.
in like Filipino Americans, for example, have a very negative stigma about coming back here to the Philippines, and honestly, this is what it's going to take. It's going to take them honestly living here
Yeah.
for X period of time.
Yeah.
Because let's look at this, right? Look at us. Look at all the people we surround ourselves with. A lot of them are foreigners too. And they're all trying to make a big difference here.
Yeah.
I've lived in other countries. I don't give a shit about those. I mean, it's not that I don't give a shit. It's just that I'm not going to give.
You don't feel as connected, right?
Yes.
Yeah. But that's really the power of the Philippines. I keep coming back here and getting frustrated and leaving.
Yeah.
But it's really because of the system itself. But what keeps me coming back is the people. It is the people.
The people.
It really, at the end of the day, it's the people, because I know that, man, the Filipino people are really the most amazing people in the world who, I mean, this country could be a first world country.
Yeah.
Right? You have the resources, you have the talent, you just don't have the proper leadership and government policies and programs. And the corruption is so high that it's really hard to even start a business here in the Philippines.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember coming back in 2015, part of this US APEC delegation, when APEC was here, and they gave us a presentation that said, the 38 easy steps to start a business in the Philippines. I'm like, 38? And they're like, it used to be 47 and now it's 38. We've reduced it. And I'm just like,
God.
why can't we just do what we do in the United States, where you can go online, set up your business, and within 24 hours you have
Set up a bank account.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here you have to line up, and it's about knowing the right people, and so if you're an everyday Filipino, the cards are stacked up against you.
Right. See, I'm not Filipino, right?
Yeah.
So I have no, I'm not Filipino ethnicity, but I came here and immediately I've never felt more accepted.
Yeah.
I've never felt more comfortable in my own skin.
Yeah. We're very
than I
hospitable
am in the
people.
Philippines.
Yeah. Filipinos go out of their way to make you feel comfortable.
Right.
And this is what I love about Filipino culture. It can be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing. We will do our best to really make people feel comfortable.
Right.
That, I mean, there's a guy. If you go on Instagram, there's a very popular Instagram called the Filipino Story that talks about this.
Oh
The
yeah, I've
nature of
seen him.
Filipino.
Very good
My
stuff.
buddy Tony Elias. He's the founder or the main producer of that channel. But he really, I mean,
Can I get that guy to come on here? I would love to talk to
yeah.
him.
He's a really
Yeah.
close friend of mine. I'll talk to him. He's based in Dallas now.
I've seen his stuff.
From San
Really
Diego.
good stuff. Great,
But
great production too.
and he also used to run Gawad Kalinga, which is kind of like Habitat for Humanity for the Philippines.
Yeah.
And he was this guy who made it big, made a lot of money in licensing and t-shirts, and came to the Philippines, and he thought he was going to get like robbed, or he had this negative stigma of the Philippines. But there he saw that, people welcomed him into their homes, which was like a tiny shack, and they had nothing, but they gave him everything they had.
Right.
Yeah. And that really is the true essence nature of the Philippines. But because of that in our culture, that's how Filipinos also get taken advantage of.
Yes.
Right. That's why again it goes back to that full circle of we don't speak up. We sometimes let ourselves get taken advantage of. And even when it comes to the leadership
Right.
of this country.
Yeah. So the point I was trying to make is that, even as a foreigner, I feel so accepted here,
Yeah.
but yet I get so frustrated with the way things are.
Huh.
Right now I'm doing things hoping I'm going to make a difference. I'm not making any money from it. I
Yeah.
am just doing it because I can and I
Yes.
want to, and I'm giving back because
Yes.
I've had my success here.
Yeah.
Somehow, some way.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the key is you got to get these Filipinos who are in, how are you going to get them to leave their leadership position or their cushy job when they're
Yeah.
comfortable life in the US and come here where things are so inefficient and, fall in love with the country
Yeah.
and be frustrated with the problems and want to do something.
Well, that's always the challenge, right? That's like the $1 billion question. But for me, what I've seen work is you don't force them. You just have them come here and experience it. And from there, that's how they feel connected. Because a lot of them will say, shit, I could have been that poor street kid. That could have been me. Right? They end up feeling connected. There's some sort of powerful force that I've experienced myself when I come back here and I see the beauty of the country and the people, and it really does keep me coming back. I mentioned I don't have all the answers to solving the problems, but if you get enough smart people to come back and say, hey, I think we might be able to make this work, and that's you see it even when there's a lot of these startup companies that are doing very well that are founded by Filipino Americans or even non-Filipinos. Right. But it takes not just going into that bahala na mentality, but it also takes other core values like pakikisama and knowing how to gather them together and rally them. And then it also really just takes having a tribe. And that's like one of the most important things that allows me to stay sane here in the Philippines, is because you are going to run into a lot of challenges, frustrations, inefficiencies, corruption, people from high up who see that if you get too big, they will cut
take
you
it
down.
from you.
They will take it from you. They will screw you over. I mean, there are stories of that,
100%.
right? I mean, and so it's about having the right group of people and I call them my tribe of, it's a bunch of, Filipino Americans, Filipinos, but we all have the same core values of wanting to make an impact here and wanting to make the Philippines better. So when I run into issues with government, I'll message my tribe and be like, hey, I'm having challenges here. They'll say, you know what? I have an uncle or I have a friend or a relative who works in that department. Let me connect you to him. They're not gonna, they're not gonna ask you for money. They're gonna take care they all want to just see this tribe all really supports one another, where they all want to see each other. Just this tribe wants to see us thrive, right? And that's what's needed here. Otherwise, if you come here by yourself and try to think you can change things up and create a company overnight or do things amazingly, you're gonna fall flat on your face. And I've seen that happen over and over again. So that's what I'm trying to prevent. Whenever I meet Filipino Americans coming here as well, I'm like, hey, let me know what I can do to be a resource for you. It can be tough doing it by yourself. And I'll meet other people who are like, man, I wish I knew about this group or this network you have. this could have saved so much time, money, and effort.
This reminds me about a hard lesson I learned.
Please share.
So, I come from a Chinese background. We really value hard work.
Yeah.
We'll outwork you,
Yeah.
right? And you have a bit of smarts, right? And generally speaking, Chinese people are pretty smart and clever. And so I came in here, and on top of that, I had this very American attitude.
Yeah.
And so I felt like just through my perseverance, hard work, dedication, just my smarts, I can win. And that's what got me into, building the tech startups here and stuff like that. Then I realized, and you just mentioned it earlier, the people at the top, and you mentioned how voting works and how there's a culture here where the top set up the system to obviously benefit themselves. So the ecosystem isn't really set up for someone like a foreigner or someone like me or even a Filipino American to come in, unless you're from the privileged class and you're part of them, to come in here and disrupt and take business from these people. Even if it helps to grow the pie, they don't care.
No, they don't.
They don't care. They don't want anything taking anything away.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with that?
For me, again, it goes back to having that tribe, having that core group of friends.
And so you mentioned that.
You have to, in order to do business here in the Philippines, and especially if you want to grow and be big, it's honestly about having the right type of partners.
Mm-hmm.
You need to have good partners on the ground who they're not going to screw you over. They're not going to steal money from your company. But that only happens when you meet people who have the right values, who align with the right core values.
And you got to make sure the people at the top get a piece of it.
Either piece of it, or we just
benefit from it.
Or benefit from a bit, right? We call it a partner. You call it a partnership, right? They'll see something you have or they'll realize that you can be an asset and a good partner to them.
Right. And that's a smarter way to play this here.
Oh, 110%.
Right.
Otherwise, it will be very hard for you to survive and do it on your own.
Absolutely. You can't just outwork and, out hustle and
not here, man.
Not here. Not here.
In the United States, you could definitely do it, right?
Yeah.
But here it's different.
Right. Well, it used to be like that in the States. Is it still like that? Like it was, all back in when my parents' generation migrated to the US because it was the land of opportunity.
Yeah.
And, I think things have changed a bit, but it's still, generally speaking, this is where you can make it big.
Well, so it's easy to live comfortably I think it would be easy to still live comfortably in the United States, get a job, right? Or even start a business in the United States. It's challenging, but at least there's systems there that work and you understand what your overhead is. Things are clearly defined over there.
Mm-hmm.
Things work. Over here, you can still be successful, but it's when it comes to even starting a business, you don't know how much you're going to have to pay. I mean, even when it comes to the BIR, right, the taxes over here, or even something as simple.
You're getting into sometimes,
you don't know what you're getting into right here. You don't know, there's so many uncertainties here.
But in the States, if you were just saving your discretionary income to try to be an entrepreneur or doing something yourself, it'd be really hard in the States, right? Because your cost to entry is so high. And your competition, right?
Yeah.
And you have big companies that dominate there, right? And so here, there are a lot more problems that could be solved, a lot more niches to carve out than you would in the States.
Yeah. And the Philippines would actually be a great test market too for stuff. What allows for people to come in here and try stuff out, or entrepreneurs to come in here, is because the cost of labor is not as much as the United States.
Yeah.
And that's why I also went into the BPO outsourcing industries, because I want to give more jobs to Filipinos, but I also want to pay them better than what they're making here, right? So we can also keep them here instead of lose them to talent abroad, right? And what's sad too is that the ones who leave, they leave by themselves, but they leave their families behind, and it
Oh, it's so
splits.
sad.
It
Yeah.
splits families apart. If like the mother
And there's a
leaves,
lot of dysfunctional families from this.
absolutely huge.
A lot.
Yeah,
And like I don't even want to get into
yeah,
some of the problems,
yeah,
and a lot of abuse comes out of it.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah, it's sad.
it is.
Yeah, and no one's looking out for these people sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot to do here, man. I mean, look, we can go on and on. I have to ask you one more thing
Sure.
before we go. And Lakhi, would love for you to come back. We need to have more discussions like this. We need to bring more people like you into these talks so that we can build awareness in this country, build awareness to other Filipinos or foreigners outside as well,
Yeah.
and to see what we see.
Yeah.
Right. But I want you to give us some advice, or give me some advice. Give the audience some. Give some Filipino Americans or overseas Filipinos who are considering it, who are thinking about maybe there could be a better opportunity here. Give them some advice.
Man, again, I don't claim to have all the answers, but the best thing I can really just tell people is just to come out here, explore the Philippines for yourself, see the challenges, right? Embrace the inefficiencies. Just right, just see what we're talking about. How that bahala na comes into play, or how you get terrible customer service, but you care deeply about these people that you don't even know, because you'll meet people who also just want to do their best and want to make you feel welcome and comfortable. At the end of the day, for me, what, like I said, keeps coming back is the people here. And I know that there are a lot of challenges, there are a lot of problems, but with that's how we have the opportunity to make things better. Feel free to connect with John, subscribe to his channel, follow him. My information will be there. You can follow me. I'm that type of person, but I always want to be a resource to help people out here, because I think there's so many problems that need fixing here in this country. So many challenges, but we're not gonna be able to do it alone, right? But if we do it together,
maybe we might have a chance. Yeah.
we have a chance, right? The rising tide raises all ships.
Absolutely. That was great talk. Thank you
Thanks
so much, brother.
for having me,
Lakhi.
brother. Swan as
Anytime,
well. Thank you for the coffee.
Yeah.
Tea. We gotta get some drinks later too. Tea.
Yeah. So if you like the content that you see here today, please consider subscribing, like it, share it with your friends, and tell us what you think. Do you think there's an opportunity for you here in the Philippines, or do you think it's just not worth it? Or do you think the Philippines is a lost cause? Give us your comments. Let us know. We would love to interact with you.